Thank you all very much for joining us. I'm really happy to introduce our three presenters. Lori Sycophus is a research associate here with NCJ FCJ, and she'll be presenting the research on child support as it relates to parenting time. Our colleagues at the Texas Council on Family Violence, Krista Delgado and Mona Muro, will be talking about their collaborative work with the local child support division. So, Lori, why don't I hand it over to you?
Thank you so much, Carlene. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can
I'm
hear
going
you.
to take that as a yes. I forget that everybody is muted. Thank you all so much again for joining. Today we want to talk about programs that establish both child support and parenting time orders for unwed parents. And this occurs primarily through state child support agencies, and several of these programs are supported by the Office of Child Support Enforcement. And so first, I'd like to give an overview of these types of programs and talk about the rationale behind integrating child support and parenting time orders. And then I'll talk about some research results that pertain to what we know about the effectiveness of these types of programs and to the assumptions underlying efforts to integrate custody and child support systems. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about the potential implications of integrating child support and parenting time orders for survivors of domestic violence and their children. Then, during the second part of the webinar, we have our representatives from the Texas Council on Family Violence, and they're going to talk about partnering with child support agencies and some things that can be done to help protect survivors and children involved in child support matters. And so, at the beginning of most of the webinars we conduct, we like to find out a little bit more about our audience. And so we have our first poll question, and that is, who is here today? Response options should pop up for you, and just select the response that best describes your role. Looks like we've got lots of attorneys with us today. Representatives from child support system, lots of variety. This is great. Some educators. Right, thank you very much. We'll have a couple more of these polling questions throughout the webinar just to keep you on your toes. And so parents seeking a divorce are usually served by the family court system. And in divorce matters, of course, child support and child custody are also usually addressed. This isn't the case for unmarried parents. Usually unmarried parents either actively seek payment of child support through state child support systems, or they're mandated to seek child support payment through state agencies, most often because they're receiving public assistance or temporary assistance for needy families. So if they want to establish recognized custody and parenting time orders, they actually need to pay a fee and go through family court. So this separate system can be cumbersome, and it's been argued that it's unfair to lower-income unwed parents. And so proposals to integrate custody and child support systems for unmarried parents were initially advanced at the national level in 1996. And even earlier than that in some states, most notably Texas has had this type of system in place for, I think, almost 30 years. These proposals really gained traction with the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act in 1996, which focused on payment of child support mainly to help offset government spending on family assistance. And so with this focus on increasing child support came an increased focus on engaging non-custodial fathers in their children's lives. So these ideas, recommendations, and efforts aimed at establishing parenting time orders in conjunction with the child support orders issued by state agencies have only gained traction since the late 1990s. The Office of Child Support Enforcement has funded and continues to fund several pilot projects in states like California. There's Oregon, Minnesota, Illinois, and several that I'm missing. I put here that Texas is included in these pilot projects. That's actually not the case. That's an error on my part. Texas has received support from OCSE, but basically they've been doing this since the 1990s. They're not considered a pilot project. This has been a statewide initiative for Texas for a long time. Now, the Obama administration has really been focused on ensuring receipt of child support, and even more so on father engagement. And policies are shifting away from simply increasing collection of child support to really encouraging non-custodial fathers to be involved in their children's lives. And so, per the Obama administration, legislation passed, beginning in 2019, if states want to receive federal TANF funds, or the Temporary Assistance for Needy Family Funds, they need to include parenting time provisions in their child support orders. Now, we also have the 2014 Sense of the Congress resolution, and that states that establishment of parenting time provisions with child support orders is an important goal, and that states should use federal funds to establish and encourage such programs. So what are the reasons for doing this? Well, there are a lot of reasons that have been presented for encouraging child support agencies to issue parenting time orders. We want to maximize accessibility to those who use child support services. And again, it's been argued that separating these two systems can be really tough on unwed parents. Most don't go to family court to resolve custody issues. When they do, it can be really expensive, time-consuming, and adversarial. We also know from some research conducted by the OCSE that access and visitation problems are pretty common in this population. About 75% of child support workers have reported that they either often or almost always hear about access and visitation problems from non-custodial parents. And these are specifically about visitation issues and not having a court order that specifies parenting time parameters. Now, there are some research findings that proponents of integrating the two systems cite again and again. We'll be taking a closer look at this research in just a few minutes. So the big arguments supported by some research are that increasing parenting time has been linked to increased or more regular child support payments, that child support payments is linked to improved outcomes for children, and that father involvement is also linked to improved outcomes for children. Now, all of the programs aimed at establishing parenting time orders with child support orders are different, and they provide different things. These are just some examples. They could rely on standardized visitation schedules, and these are sometimes guided by state statutes. So basically, all unmarried parents get the same type of parenting plan unless there's a dispute. I know that Oregon has online resources that guide parents through the process. They can print and complete their own parenting plan for approval. I know that Texas has a telephone hotline where parents can talk to actual people that will help them through the process and answer questions that they may have. Some programs also offer additional services like parent education, parenting classes, supervised visitations, that kind of thing. And I believe that most of these programs offer mediation or other third-party resolution services. A lot of these programs are newer, and so we don't have data on their effectiveness yet, although I think that evaluations of the impacts of some pilot projects more recently supported by the OCSE are supposed to be published sometime this year, so that's good. Evaluations of programs that have been in place for a while have yielded some promising findings. Initial studies of the Access and Visitation Program, which again was initiated in 1996, revealed that over 60% of the participating parents, the non-custodial parents, paid more child support as a result of those services, and the average amount of their payments also increased about 20%. And further, between 20% and 33% of non-custodial parents across sites did report increased contact with their children after participating in the program. Now, we also have evaluation results from some projects in Colorado, Texas, and Tennessee. Again, here I listed Texas as a pilot project, although Colorado and Tennessee were. Texas isn't considered a pilot project. but this does evaluate their efforts, and they have received some support. And this is kind of unique in terms of evaluations in this field, that it actually involves experimental design, although strict randomization procedures weren't followed in all sites. And so cases were either assigned to low or high treatment groups. In the low treatment group, parents received written materials about their rights and community services, pretty general. But in the high treatment group, parents had informal consultation, and they often got the opportunity to consult with both an attorney and a mediator. And so overall, parents who participated in this program overall, they reported positive experiences with their services, and the evaluators found that parenting time plans could be integrated during all stages of a case without really delaying things. One thing I want to back up and point out here is that I don't have a ton of academic sites in here just because it muddies up the PowerPoint. This actual, these research results were taken from a publication by Pearson. The actual research, though, was conducted around 2007. We have a lag in evaluation findings that we're waiting for more. So in terms of outcomes, we found that between 70% and 81% of participants reached a parenting time agreement. In Tennessee, parents in the high-level treatment group were significantly more likely to report increased contact with their children compared to those in the lower-level group. In Texas, parents in the high-level group reported significant improvements in their relationships with the other parents. And in both of these states, there was a significant increase in the percentage of child support paid in the high-level group as compared to the low-level group. So these are pretty promising findings that I did want to point out. And with this audience, I don't think I need to explain how issuing parenting time orders with child support orders can sometimes put domestic violence survivors and their children at risk. Issues regarding parenting time and child support as well shouldn't be resolved without a lot of thoughtful consideration for these families affected by domestic violence. And importantly, both the Obama administration and Congress do urge child support agencies to incorporate strong family violence safeguards, those are their words, when attempting to establish parenting time. However, there is no standard protocol or guidelines for what family violence safeguards to incorporate, or really about how to do this, and so the precautions taken vary across states and jurisdictions. And our presenters for the second half of the webinar are going to talk more about this, so I'm just going to give you some quick examples of common family violence safeguards. We have the good cause waiver, and this is actually available in all child support cases initiated by the state. This will waive child support enforcement requirements for recipients of public assistance, but they have to provide evidence that the non-custodial parent has perpetrated domestic violence. Now, the family violence indicator is similar. This prevents the state from disclosing the location and other information about survivors so that they can pursue child support safely. In a lot of these programs, they screen for domestic violence multiple times. So they might do it at intake, they might do it again if they're filling out questionnaires, they might do it again before mediation. So they have a lot of different opportunities to disclose. And some of these programs offer what they call safe parenting plans. So an example of this is that a custodial parent might answer a questionnaire about their history of domestic violence and risk factors. And then based on their specific responses, they are referred to a variety of parenting plans to choose from that offer different levels of protection. And so let's turn now to some of the assumptions underlying the proposals and programs to integrate child support and parenting time services. There's been debate about these claims, even though there is some research to support them. And this can tell us a little bit more about how conclusive the research really is, and does it apply to the population of those typically served by child support agencies. So one of the main contentions is that child support payment leads to better child outcomes. And we do find that there's a pretty large body of research out there that supports this. We have the results of some meta-analyses. So a meta-analysis is really a systematic examination of the finding of multiple studies on this topic. The one I cite here covers 14 studies. And that's shown across studies that child support payment is positively related to academic success and decreased child behavioral problems. A study by Green and Moore found that child support payment not only had positive effects on child behavior, but it was also associated with higher quality home environments. And I believe this particular study sampled low-income African-American families. Research also indicates that consistent payment of child support is associated with children functioning better at school, increased involvement in activities, and overall better child mental health. There are a few studies out there, though, that have found no effects of child support payments on child outcomes. Overall, though, this contention holds. I haven't found anything that says it leads to worse outcomes. So this actually has been one of the biggest findings behind the push to issue parenting time orders with child support orders. And that's that increased contact between the non-custodial parent and the child is associated with an increased likelihood of paying child support. Note that this is an association. It's not about cause. It's not a causal relationship. And unlike child support payment and child outcomes, this particular contention has been associated with a lot of conflicting findings. Now, some researchers, for instance, have used statistical techniques, which for your sanity I won't go into here, to demonstrate the implementation of certain child support enforcement related policies have actually led to increases in child support payment. And then those increases in payment have led to increased contact between children and non-custodial parents. So they are suggesting a directional relationship. And the rationale behind this directional relationship they found is that you can legislate child support payment, but not contact. So payment has to come first, and that leads to more contact. But it's not so simple. We've got other studies that have actually found an inverse relationship between child support payment and contact between the child and the non-custodial parent, which is really odd. We don't know exactly why. Researchers have proposed that maybe one substitutes for the other. So if the non-custodial parent pays, they think they're contributing to parenting, so they feel they don't have to visit with the child as often. Again, this is just a kind of a hypothesized explanation for this. Now, to further complicate things, we have other research that has suggested that it's actually the contact that leads to the increased likelihood of payment, but the relationships aren't that simple. As you can imagine, there are a whole other slew of factors at play that are not necessarily measured or taken into account in these studies. For instance, some research has found that when you account for factors such as the father's emotional commitment to the child, the relationships between contact and child support payment actually disappear. Most of this research focuses on families with family court orders for child support in custody, and so we can't really say that it's representative of the population that uses other child support services. It's also been argued that a lot of this research oversamples more dedicated fathers because it's not always easy to locate and survey disengaged non-custodial fathers. And so really research needs to better differentiate between different types of child support, for instance, mandated child support versus more informal means of child support, and consider how visitation is measured. Some research has found, for example, that child support payment predicts the likelihood of having any contact at all, but not the frequency of contact. So there are a whole lot of considerations before we can kind of accept this relationship as fact. Finally, we know in general that parental contact and involvement are very good things for children. There is a ton of research that supports this. We're not disputing this. But again, we have to say that a lot of this research was conducted comparing married parents and divorced parents. Unmarried parents aren't very well represented in this research. And a more recent meta-analysis actually indicates, and that's the Adamson and Johnson site you see here, that it's quality, it's not quantity of the father contact and involvement in their children's lives that matter. So for non-custodial fathers who had high quality interactions and relationships with their children, their contact did have a positive impact in several areas in their children's life, improved educational outcomes, psychological health, social well-being, those types of things. But considering the representativeness problem, Carlson and Magnuson, who actually did a literature review that focused on low-income and non-resident fathers, made the following argument below. And that's it. There are circumstances under which low-income, non-resident fathers' involvement can have a positive influence on children's development and well-being, but on average, it does not. So why might contact with non-custodial fathers not positively influence some children? So overall, we know from research that there are statistically significant differences between resident fathers and non-resident fathers, as listed here. Compared to resident fathers, non-resident fathers are more likely to engage in criminal behaviors, have issues with substance abuse, experience a variety of psychological problems, and perpetrate violence against women. Now, this doesn't mean that this describes all or most of non-resident fathers, but we do want to point out that non-resident fathers are simply more likely to have some of these characteristics. And a lot of this research that is just cited to justify programs establishing both child support and parenting time orders doesn't represent the majority of the population served by the Office of Child Support Enforcement. Now, let's take a look at a specific example of how the effects of contact can vary according to parent characteristics. And I hope I'm pronouncing it right, it's Jaffe and colleagues. They looked at the relationships between father's antisocial behaviors, father-child contact, and child behavior. And so they measured father presence, and that was how long the father lived with the child. I believe it was during the first 5 years of the child's life. And they also measured caretaking behavior. So things like, you know, how often do you get the child ready for bed, prepare meals, things like that. And they found that both father presence and caretaking actually were negatively associated with child behavior problems for fathers who had low and medium levels of antisocial behavior. But among fathers with high levels of antisocial behavior, the more that they were around and the more caretaking they engaged in, the more likely their children were to actually have serious behavior problems, and that includes conduct disorder. And again, we're not saying that any of the assumptions underlying encouragement of integrating parenting time and child support services are wrong. We just need to look at this research more closely, and we need to understand that a lot of the research that's out there might not generalize to populations served by these child support agencies. And I'm about to actually turn it over to our Texas presenters, but I did want to kind of turn more to the incidence of domestic violence among individuals who are served by these programs. And so my second poll question, and this is just your estimate, this is just your guess. What percentage of low-income mothers have been abused by their non-custodial fathers? Not their fathers, their children's fathers. Good, I'm glad to see that y'all are still with us. Again, these are just estimates. And it looks like most of you are saying that it's between 25 and 75%. Thank you for your participation in that. And it looks like it's 50 to 75%, slightly edging it out. So I wish I knew the answer. I don't know the answer. I do know from reading various reports that a lot of these programs cite about 10% of cases that they're flagging for domestic violence. Some go as high as 20. And looking at your estimates, it seems like a lot of you agree that this is probably an underestimate, and this is for several reasons. Of course, domestic violence is notoriously unreported. I think we've all heard the statistic that 1 in 4 women are survivors. I recently came across a new one that 1 in 3 women are survivors. And this doesn't mean that they're survivors from abuse at the hands of the non-custodial parent, but it's still something to think about. We know that domestic violence is significantly more common among younger, lower income, unmarried partners. These are the types of clients served by programs that are integrating child support services and parenting time services. One other fact to know, there was recently a Texas study. It was about 800, I think, unmarried mothers, and 20% of them reported that non-custodial fathers perpetrated abuse. And this is the percentage of of women who are actually reporting it. And so some of the concerns with efforts to integrate parenting time orders into child support services is that we're underestimating the incidence of domestic violence among those served by OCSC. And when I go over these concerns, it's going to be really quick because, again, Texas is going to talk more about what we can do to address these concerns. But another concern is that screening practices are inconsistent a lot of times and unspecified in some programs. I am going to say, though, I know that some programs do have very good screening practices in place and solid protocols. The problem is that there's no standardized protocol, and we don't know who's doing this across all of the programs. We know for some research, and you can email me for more about this because I don't have time to talk about it in detail now, but that the family violence option, although it's a good thing, it hasn't worked as expected. Family violence indicators may also be absent. A big concern about these proposals to integrate parenting time orders into child support services is that survivors don't always fully understand the system and their options. And online resources are a great start, but these survivors really need to be cognizant of their risks and what they're doing and what they're agreeing to in these procedures. Finally, mediation can be problematic. This isn't to say that mediation is inappropriate for all survivors of domestic violence at all. Some may choose to have their cases mediated, but there are a lot of concerns surrounding this. So these are some of the concerns, but these programs have been established for a while. It looks like they're going to increase in popularity. We have seen some positive outcomes for some of these programs. So really now what we need to think about is how we can help ensure the safety of survivors and children. And with that, I'm going to wrap up and turn it over to Kristen Mona. Contact me with any questions. I know a lot of you have already requested some research results, and I'll get those to you. Just send me an email. Thank you very much.
Well, hello. Good afternoon if you're on Central or East Coast time. This is Krista Delgado, and I'm with Mona Moro from the Texas Council on Family Violence. I'm going to move forward here and just to very briefly let you all know that the Texas Council on Family Violence is a state coalition. We're a membership program of family violence service providers and batterer intervention and prevention programs, as well as allied professionals across the state of Texas. As most of you know, in different parts of the country, each state and territory has its own coalition. So we always encourage y'all to reach out to our colleagues at coalitions across the country for what's going on in terms of statewide work. At the Texas Council on Family Violence, we focus on policy, which is the department in which Mona and I work. We also have a primary prevention programs team, as well as a team that is dedicated to supporting our service providers across the state. And just to give a short backdrop in terms of our work and our sort of evolution towards such an emphasis on child support coming from the coalition standpoint, we started with a very acute focus on welfare reform and public benefits. I think directly following welfare reform in 1996 and the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which Lori mentioned, many domestic violence advocates across the country, particular national folks, really turned attention in that direction because there were so many concerns associated with the new requirements of the TANF program as well as other public benefits. And there was so many concerns in the fact that these programs were being greatly restricted in terms of who had access to them and for how long. We did a lot of work on the family violence option, which also Lori mentioned, which allows victims of domestic violence to potentially waive certain requirements of public benefits programs, including child support. While the rest of this webinar is really dedicated to our work within the child support arena and our collaboration with the Texas 4D agency, the Office of the Attorney General, I do want to highlight and emphasize to everyone on the call that the population of public benefits recipients remains our most vulnerable population and is the population that should continue to receive most of our attention, because as Lori also mentioned, the family violence option has not been implemented at scale or in a meaningful way in probably any state in the country. Survivors routinely are not made aware of their option to waive the requirement, particularly around child support, and it just isn't happening. And it's really important when you're thinking about survivors being required to take part in certain systems that we already know there may be risks, that they are fully aware of their protections and their options, as well as what that process and what that system they're being required to enter may entail. So I didn't want to lose that before going on with the focus on child support. We really started to collaborate more with the Office of the Attorney General here in Texas in the mid-2000s, when there was a good deal of discussion and funding coming our way around healthy marriage, as well as responsible fatherhood programming. And the Attorney General's office, particularly the Child Support Division and the Family Initiatives Division within child support, was operating some very distinct and exciting programs around involvement for non-custodial parents and around fragile families that resonated with the focused population when you're doing anti-poverty work for any population, but including survivors of domestic violence. And as we started to expand our view of economic security, since less and less individuals were eligible to receive TANF, and TANF in the state of Texas is extraordinarily low in terms of the benefit and only available to people in extreme poverty, we started to look to other economic options. And as we understood the volume of cases and families that were within our Office of the Attorney General child support system, as we started to understand the fact that the child support system, the public system, the 4D system was also including custody orders within their child support establishment. And as we knew that we had, again, our very vulnerable population of extraordinarily poor folks that were eligible to receive TANF for child care services and thus required to cooperate with child support, we really started to turn our attention towards the 4D program. But it wasn't right away. It was a little late. And before I move on and talk about the Texas context and our work, I would really like to hear from y'all in a poll in terms of, have you assisted survivors of domestic violence in navigating your state's 4D child support system or process? So if you could take a moment to go ahead and respond to that question. And if you respond yes, if you could chat in just some very brief reflections that you gained from the survivors that you were helping in terms of the nature of the process, the outcome, and then of the actual process, but also if there was any sort of long-term outcomes. That would be really helpful, because I would love to hear how it's going across the country. So I'll just give folks a couple minutes or a minute or so just to chat in, and we'll be reviewing these chats. So if there's questions within there or important things to highlight, we'll definitely circle back to those. So it looks like a significant portion, so well over 30% of you have stated that you have assisted in this process. So again, if you could chat in, that would be great. And I'll go ahead and continue with the presentation while folks are chatting. And so just to give a little bit of an example of our Texas context, because I really wanted to make sure that it's clear that we are a specific setting, and that's not just because of the politicians you may have heard of coming out of our state. But we're big. I guess you probably heard that too. But we're also a very high-performing state. And by high-performing, I mean that Texas repeatedly collects extraordinarily high levels of child support in comparison to other states. So we do a very good job on collections here in the state of Texas. So we are bringing in a good amount of money. This actually came as a little bit of a surprise to me when I first heard this about 10 years ago, because I tended to work with very poor survivors of domestic violence where the non-custodial parent was either very poor and was not able to pay child support, or they were sort of what we always think of as bettors and people that just would never pay child support. So I never saw a lot of my clients getting child support, but I came to understand that I was looking at a very specific slice of the population, and in our state we do a particularly effective job in terms of collections. Our 4D agency is the Office of the Attorney General, and I note this just so people know who our agency is, but also because there's already a legal context, obviously, that's in operation when our child support division is within the Office of the Attorney General. I know that other child support divisions in other states are within the Department of Human Services, which tend to have a less legal focus. So that also sort of helps us to stand out a little bit. When we have family violence indicators on our cases, so those flags that get marked internally within the 4D system if someone has presented a concern around family violence, those cases are automatically routed through a court process and heard by an associate judge. So we don't, it's not an administrative process for people that are flagged with a family violence indicator case. So that's also important to mention because some states have exclusively administrative child support divisions. And then the other thing, and probably the most distinct part about Texas's history, is that we've had a long-standing practice since 1989, so almost 30 years of establishing parenting time within our child support orders. So not only do we establish parenting time, and did Texas establish both presumptive child support guidelines at the same time as presumptive parenting time, but we also have presumptive parenting time in Texas and have for 30 years, which is a standard possession order, which again is very different from other states that some of which are just now starting to look at having assumed or presumptive or default parenting time statutes. So in terms of our work with the Texas Office of the Attorney General, our child support system, we began to meet more frequently as we both learned more about each other's organization and work. And unfortunately, there were some tragic and very significant child support domestic violence fatalities that occurred in Texas that really elevated the need to focus on these intersections at both the Texas Council on Family Violence as an advocacy organization for survivors and advocates for survivors, as well as within the Texas Office of the Attorney General Child Support Division, because they have a huge stake in making sure that people are able to safely access their program. One of the first things that we did was establish a domestic violence work group, and again, this was housed within the Texas Office of the Attorney General. They really brought together the stakeholders, and one of the best pieces of this when I participated on it was it highlighted the extreme learning curve that I had as an advocate for survivors, and it also helped me to learn a lot more about the child support system, which is extremely complicated and has a lot of pieces to it. And I think it also helped the folks that were within the child support system, particularly some of your assistant attorneys general and managing attorneys of child support offices across the state, recognize that a lot of their policies and processes were not intuitive, because here you had someone that was invested in understanding their process, but asking what they saw as very basic questions because they weren't things that I would have been able to find out without asking someone on the inside. So it was helpful and reflective of what the general public and particularly survivors of domestic violence might be experiencing when they're considering or going through the child support process. So I still am in no way a child support division expert, but I think one of the good things about that is it pushes us as advocates to continue to learn because, as we know, in effective safety planning, the only way to effectively safety plan with survivors or to think about particular policies or practices that are going to be safer is to understand that process intimately so that we can identify those risks or help survivors themselves identify those risks, and then make for policies and procedures that are going to help hopefully ameliorate some of those risks, and then continue to have a feedback loop with the system that we're working with. So following the domestic violence work group, we have continued to had a formalized relationship with our child support division here in Texas. And one of the most beneficial pieces to that relationship is that we continued to identify needed pieces of collateral or work products, either in terms of outreach, that I'm going to highlight some of those that would be aimed directly towards survivors within the general public that might be accessing the AG system, but also in terms of how we can teach our own field. So from our end, how TCFV can really impart some of this information to advocates across the state so that they are really educating survivors and helping them to make informed decisions and safely navigate the child support process. And then on the side of the Attorney General, which really took it on themselves, I'm going to go back here, to look into their own policies affecting family violence survivors and how they dealt with cases where there was a family violence indicator, and really looking into training. So there was sort of work that was done in both fields, and both of our agencies informed the work on either side. And so just to very quickly highlight some of the outreach pieces that we developed. This is a poster that we made that just is talking about the child support process, and it's in English and Spanish, and this has been in our shelter programs and in child support offices for a number of years, that just very briefly highlights the key points about the child support process, which many people, even though we've had a 30-year system of establishing custody orders, which is within our child support orders in Texas, most people don't associate the fact that if they go to the Attorney General to get child support that they're going to end up having to work through a custody order with the other parent. So we felt like that was extraordinarily important to highlight to survivors, as well as the fact that they're most likely going to have contact and have to talk and more or less negotiate in some way, even if it's in separate rooms with the other parent around the support and the parenting time. So those two pieces we thought were really critical to get out there. And then we also have a poster that's specific to the TANF and Medicaid requirements of child support to inform public benefits recipients of their options, either for good cause or to go through the child support system, but to alert the Office of the Attorney General so that they can have their case flagged with a family violence indicator. And so I want to just pause here around the family violence indicator and make sure that people are understanding that it's separate from the family violence option. The family violence option is a waiver that recipients of certain public benefits can receive so that they do not have to participate in the requirement of child support. The family violence indicator is an internal flag that state child support systems put on cases to alert staff that this is a family violence case. And then it's handled distinctively. In Texas, as I mentioned before, all cases that are flagged with the family violence indicator are routed to court. That doesn't mean that there is only one outcome of those cases. We still, our courts, our child support courts, our 4D courts do not operate in a vacuum. They still are following the Texas Family Code and all of the laws that govern establishing parenting time, which is called conservatorship and access here in Texas. So this is an example of our child support and family violence bench card that was created for these associate judges handling child support cases of survivors so that they could see the applicable areas of the law and really think about how they're handling and what the final outcome and what looks like a safe and workable order when domestic violence is found in a case. But again, just because a family has a family violence indicator on their case, that doesn't necessarily guarantee any one outcome in their order. And that's really important to remember because there's policies and practices that advocates can encourage and work with their 4D entities to raise those, to make sure that more people's cases are being flagged appropriately with the family violence indicator. And there's also policies and practices that need to be explored to think about working towards these safe and workable outcomes because those are two separate things. This is our website that we've created with the Office of the Attorney General. It's called Get Child Support Safely, and I think someone's going to let me share my screen so I can actually show you. Yes. Second monitor. There we go. All right. So you should see it here now. So it's found online, www.getchildsupportsafely, if you're interested in looking at it. This, again, was a piece of outreach that we thought was important. It's been, we've had this website for over 5 years now to really help potential survivors who are potential customers of the Office of the Attorney General Child Support Division and already in that process to be able to learn a little bit more about it and make safety decisions. So we have different kinds of tabs people can go to. So as you see, there's that first tab. You can think about if you're applying for child support through the Office of the Attorney General. Under each of these various tabs, you have play buttons. Those are video vignettes. They're about 5 minutes, and they help explain the process. And that was also a collaborative project that we did with the Child Support Division that had both survivors and advocates as well as Office of the Attorney General staff talking about the child support process. And then once you hit on a certain tab, you get a lot more information. This is obviously too small for everyone to read right now. And then it even more so links to sort of demonstrate where people might want to actually make sure they're checking boxes on the application or sharing certain information. So I'll go back to the regular PowerPoint there. All right. So in terms of what has happened over on the Child Support Division side in Texas, and really demonstrative of a deep and valuable collaboration is that they really went internally into their own policies and revised their family violence policies from start to finish. And with them jointly, we developed training on these policies that, again, everything is a learning opportunity, helped us to understand that different staff within the Child Support Division required role-specific training. So we also started with the Assistant Attorneys General that are in the child support courts with specific training based on their function on family violence. So this is the last piece of outreach that we've collaborated on recently, and this is a toolkit that was designed for advocates that are working in domestic violence programs or outside of domestic violence programs that are working with survivors that's specific to the child support system. And we have these on USB drives. We're able to send a copy out if you're interested. Just contact us. One thing I just want to highlight, and again, it's too small to see, but there's some important things that are on the toolkit that we don't feel are appropriate to share online because they might just give abusers some more information than they need. But one of the great pieces, and I think it's just helpful when thinking about child support and survivors generally, is just this idea of things to consider in terms of whether or not child support is right for a survivor of domestic violence to even apply for at a given time based on her particular circumstance and safety risks. And then we also have another worksheet. Again, I would encourage y'all to look at this, especially the lawyers. I think even outside of the 4D context, it can be really helpful because it helps survivors and advocates that can be really helpful to survivors to be more effective in asserting themselves in the court setting. Think through how they're going to document family violence if they want to bring that before the court because they're asking for some tailored provisions. Thinking about if they want child support, if that's safe, if they are going to think about retroactive child support, and then thinking through conservatorship, which is a term of art here in Texas for custody. So in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the parents, and then parenting time, which is really that visitation piece. The other piece to consider is address non-disclosure because, again, that's not a given. Just because someone has a family violence indicator internally on their case with our 4D agency, and the 4D agency will not release their address to anyone, it does not mean that they're automatically going to get their address withheld from court documents. So if that would be a safety threat to have their physical address in a court document, they need to get an address non-disclosure as a part of that order. So just to quickly go over some key takeaways, always, think about survivor safety. And in prioritizing survivor safety, I think that this requires advocates to gain a comprehensive understanding of the systems that are involved in any given process that we know survivors are going to enter. So even regardless of feelings about the process or about those systems, it is important as good advocates to understand them so that we can actually do good work with survivors in terms of identifying potential risks and really helping them advocate for themselves within these processes so that they can work out, hopefully, safety. Also, establishing relationships and communication with systems is key. We're a policy team, but we're a non-traditional policy team in that we're very applied policy. So there's always going to be model policy that we might push, but it is critical that for where we are now and with the stakeholders in systems that we have key connections so that when survivors reach us and need our help, we have people within those systems that we can call on to help us, to help navigate those survivors through it, and so that we can get to some kind of good resolve. Again, understanding what the risks might be and highlighting those in your outreach and making sure that there's ongoing feedback with systems. So that's been something we've been really fortunate to have with our 4D office, is that as we hear of issues coming up, we can communicate those back and then think about ways to maybe avert those or better ways to handle them in the future and answer those questions. So we don't have a ton of time for questions. I'm sorry about that. So, but I want to open it up and see if there was things that NCJ/FCJ noticed in the chat that we need to cover.
Hi, Krista. Thank you for your presentation. There were a lot of great comments listed in the chat, but at this point we don't have any questions. I know that Lori already responded to a couple of the questions from her presentation having to do with the current literature that's out there. But I'd like to reiterate, for any of you who have a question now, please put it in the chat box. We have a few more minutes with our presenters. Krista, it looks like a few people are typing now. One is from Gregory, and he's wondering what are examples of ethical dilemmas that come up in these types of cases?
Ooh, that sounds, Gregory must be a lawyer. I feel like we're from an advocacy standpoint, so I don't, and because we don't do direct practice, while we do talk to survivors pretty regularly and we work with advocates in the field, we have less sort of ethical pieces. I think that would be a good question to ask attorneys that were representing survivors in child support cases, or I don't know which state that Gregory is in, but you know, in Texas we have our assistant attorneys general that are attorneys. They're licensed by the bar and they're under the purview of the Office of the Attorney General, and I'm sure that they would have some response in terms of potential ethical dilemmas. But I'm sorry that I don't have, I just think that everyone should be as knowledgeable as possible and get involved on behalf of survivor safety, but that's not probably in line with an ethical dilemma piece.
Thank you for trying to respond to that. Completely understandable. We have a few more people that are still typing away, but as we're doing this, I'd like to remind everybody that right at the end of the webinar, we will be popping up a survey, and we're going to ask you to take a few minutes to complete that because it's very important that you provide us feedback for future webinars. We hope that you enjoyed this presentation. Actually, we're at the hour now. I wanted to reiterate that for any of you who are attending the webinar and would like a certificate of attendance, please email Alicia Lord at alord, L-O-R-D, at ncjfcj.org. And she just put in her email address in the chat box for you. We want to thank our presenters one last time. Lori, Mona, Krista, you guys did a fabulous job. This was a very interesting topic. We will make sure that all the information, the PowerPoints, as well as web links are posted to the National Council website. Thanks again for your participation. Krista, Lori, Mona, would you like to say any last-minute statements?
No, I'm just excited that there's some attention to this issue, and in the future, if you all have any questions or would like to see any of the materials that we've created here in Texas with our 4D agency, please feel free to reach out to us.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Everybody have a great day.